So we're talking about these new digital technologies, and I think it's very important to consider some things. And so today I want to talk about a very particular technology, a technology that has some amazing benefits, and I hope, by the way, that this shape doesn't give it away. Some amazing benefits, right? High portability and accessibility, dispersal of information, synchronous and asynchronous access, this welcoming of new participants in, right? Community formation. I mean, a lot of really great stuff. But there are also threats, dangers, right? I mean, distraction, the loss of control of various kinds, right? And this requirement for us to invent new systems and understand new ways of thinking things. And there's going to be obsolescences, stuff that we've held dear for a long time. It's going to disappear. And we're going to get access suddenly to quantities of information that are massively overwhelming. And the technology of which I speak, of course, the printed book. Now, I should tell you that I'm actually not a technologist. I'm a medievalist. My specialty is actually heretical literature, heretical Christian literature of the 14th century in England. So it gives me a slightly different perspective, perhaps. But I have to tell you that when the book was introduced, when the printed book was introduced in the Middle Ages, the university said, this is going to be the destruction of learning. I mean, think about it. The book, when you were in the Middle Ages, you had to make your own. You had to have this discipline. You had to understand how to abbreviate. You had to do all of these things. And now, it's just easy. It's already made for you. There's no effort involved. I mean, it's the cheapest collapse of learning possible. They hated the printed book and fought against it for many years. So, to begin, a little consideration of technology. Technologies become successful because they solve a problem. They do something for us. And in becoming successful, they create a new community. This new culture forms around that technology. But as it becomes successful and creates a new technology, new problems will begin to emerge. And those new problems will cause destabilization. And so there will be all of a sudden all these new possibilities to solve that problem, one of which will solve the problem, and the cycle will repeat. So we get this move from innovation to building to solidification, destabilization, and then back to innovation again. And there are these tensions, right? And we feel these tensions profoundly between innovation and solidification, between building and destabilizing. And I promise you right now, we are in a period of great destabilization. We're sort of on this side of that equation. And more accurately, many of us are here, and many of our students are there, which is part of the problem. So, to begin in the Middle Ages, right? It's the middle of all things. Everything else is peripheral. You understand this. This is the age of hands. But I'm going to jump back earlier, actually, and I want to ask this question. How many of you remember this switch in popular culture? Anyone? Is anyone around? This is about the 3rd century of the Common Era, the move away from scrolls. I mean, we still have scrolls, obviously. I don't know, I mean, I was yesterday at the Western Wall, which was a very moving experience at the Wailing Wall, and obviously there were these beautiful scrolls there. But I don't see any of you with one today. Why not? Why did we make this switch? I know my book is facing completely the wrong direction. Why this switch? There are 2 reasons. Yes. Think about it. This is a linear access device. This is a random access technology. Huh? If I want to find something in a scroll, I have to scroll to the end, right? But if I want to find something in a book, I can flip right there. In fact, I can have 3 or even 4 places with my fingers in 3 or 4 places at a time. I'm sorry? An index. You do need an index. But still, with a scroll, you have to scroll all the way through to get to the thing I want to. But with a book, I can go anywhere. So it's random access. There's another reason. What? Storage is about the same. You can have a really big scroll. You can have a really big book. You can have a really small. It's about the same. I can write very small. No, I mean, remember, this is in the 3rd century of the Common Era. There's no printing yet. There's no printing for more than 1,000 years after this. Its order is about the same. I start at the beginning, I end at the end. Okay. Yes. That's true, but I can do that in a scroll too. I make a cut, right? I can sew in an insert. No, okay, all right. I'll give you the answer. People could do this with a scroll too. Packaging, it's really all about packaging, right? I mean, here's the thing. How many of you could imagine riding the bus and reading a scroll at the same time? How would you? Right? There were no buses, okay, all right. Touche. The book is inherently, that's well done. I would high-five you from here. The book is inherently portable. It has these covers that make it durable so that I can put it in my pocket, right? And I can read it with one hand. I can hold it with one hand. I mean, really, for a scroll, I also have to have a table. It's very hard for me, unless I carry a table around with me. Obviously, I've been working on building one, right? But it's very hard for me to read a scroll mobily. So what I want to tell you is 2 things. 1,700 years ago, almost 2,000 years ago, people wanted mobility. They wanted to carry their information with them where they wanted to go, and they wanted access. They wanted to be able to get to the stuff they wanted to when they wanted to get at it. This is nothing new. And I think it's very easy for us to get distracted and to say, oh, well, there's these new technologies, and this is things people have wanted forever. It's not different. So let's think about the age of books. Let's think about what happens. The books, I think we have a sort of narrow perspective on books. I mean, we think of books as primarily text, and even old books. I mean, here's a lovely old book, but books also used to have multimedia, right? This is the Golden Haggadah. It's in the British Library, obviously. They've tagged the pages, right? But look at this multimedia. I mean, I get these stories. This is the tradition of the Haggadim, isn't it? That you don't just read the text, but you experience the pictures, and you're eating the food, and you're doing all these things at the same time, right? I mean, this is nothing new either. People want this multi-sensory experience. The funny thing is, in printed books, we mostly got rid of that. Just the page. I just want the page. I just want the words. And books were inherently customizable. Look at these 2 sort of goofy-looking fellows. The thing I love about this picture is, this is a picture in a book of the patron of the book receiving the book from the scribe who wrote, from the person who commissioned it. That's kind of a goofy thing, isn't it? This is a picture of the guy getting the book that this picture is in. That's very exciting, very customized, right? Now, I call this the age of hands because it turns out hands are the only way to transfer information in this age. In fact, the idea is we medievalists recognize a manuscript by its handwriting. Different hands produce different texts, and this is how we trace these manuscripts' origins, because you can see a particular hand. And you can tell, for example, when the scribe is getting tired, when his hand is getting cramped, the words change. This is very human, very personal. And of course, the task in the medieval university, the task of the teacher was lecture. But it's not lecture as we consider lecture. Lecture originally is, I read the book so that you can make a copy of it. By the way, this is why, again, in the medieval academy, they were so upset about the printed book, because it totally disrupted teaching. What do I do? Students just bought the book, and now what do? They don't need me anymore. That's bad. I will find a way to ban the book, right? Because lecture was reading out loud so that you could make your own copy. The thing is, although this was very customized and very personalized and very human, it was also very limited, right? I mean, the model is that this is the locus. There's only one point of contact. Do you realize there's no technology for starting in the Middle Ages and then going back to the dawn of history? There's no technology for transmitting information easily and effectively across distance other than by hand. The model is that this is the local market, right? And you can get amazing and great food at the local market, and it's lovely. But I have to tell you, there are things I've been enjoying eating here in Israel that I can't get at my local market in Texas. For example, we're several hundred miles away from the nearest place to get fish. And there are no olives in Abilene. Imagine that world. So if the model of education is, if I want to learn from either a person or a manuscript in a distant place, I have to actually go there. If I'm going to learn from Constantinople, I have to go to Constantinople and then come back. If I have to go, to Milan or to Rome or wherever, I mean, I have to actually go there. And if I can't afford to go there, I have no option to learn. I'm locked out. I mean, the model is there are all these people, and there are very few people who get to consume, and even fewer people who get to produce, and almost everyone else gets lost. They disappear. Their stories disappear. Their knowledge disappears. The promise, the ideas that they have disappear, which is a great tragedy. So the chief problem of this first age, the chief problem of the age of hands, is access. Not everybody can get to the information they need. And if only there were someone, if there were only someone who would invent a technology that would help with that. Now, great things about this, though, because this learning is actually really rich. It's the way people learned for most of human history. They learned in context and in relationship. So if I was going to learn from a scholar, I went and lived with that scholar, right? I woke up when that scholar woke up. I went to bed when that scholar went to bed. We talked through the day. There was no difference between class time and home time, and it was all the same. If I went to learn a trade, like our friendly baker here, I went and learned it by living with the baker. We woke up when the baker woke up. We went to bed when the baker went to bed. And I did what bakers do. I learned that task. And there were some very particular ways we taught in this age, ways that characterized human teaching, again, all the way back to the dawn of time. And if you know Walter Ong, this is from his, sort of adapted from his book, Orality and Literacy. So this is relationship. This is relational. This is about, dialogue back and forth. And teachers are guides or mentors. This is a very personal relationship. And I learn by practice and apprenticeship. I keep trying things until I get them right. That idea of learning in a particular context is very important as well. That I learn in a very rich situation. I mean, the interesting thing is, when we learn later, we're going to decontextualize learning. We're going to build spaces like this actually really excellent lecture hall, but a space that's very cut off from the rest of the world. This is not so for most of human history. And I keep doing things, I keep repeating things until I get them right. So if my dough collapses, I have to make another loaf. I have to keep making the loaves until I get it right. There's no test that I just fail and then I move on. I keep doing it. This is very embodied, it's very subjective, it's very personal, it's dialectic, it's about discussion, and it's broadly interconnected. The second age, the age of books. Right? Our friend Gutenberg solves the problem. He solves that technological problem. I mean, I've got all these rich capabilities, but again, very few people can participate. By the way, did you know that his middle name means goose meat? Gänsfleisch. This is not common. I don't think he had it on his business cards. Gutenberg invents the first technology to allow us to transmit information over distance, the printed book. And the beauty of these things is they come one after another off the assembly line. They're all the same, right? And you can produce them in these massive quantities. So we get these giant libraries for the first time. I mean, huge libraries, not libraries of a few hundred books like you have in the Middle Ages, libraries of, in fact, millions of books, which is excellent and terrible at the same time. I mean, one problem, of course, of this, where is the book I'm looking for? My problem now is, how do I sort stuff? How do I find stuff? How do I make sense of all that big pile of stuff? I have to find a technology. I have to invent a technology that lets me discover the thing I'm looking for. And so we invented, how many of you remember the card catalog? How many of you remember how long it took to get information using this technology? I mean, think about it, right? You'd first start by going to the, wait a minute, what did the librarians call the thing that I wanted to look up? I mean, I remember as an undergraduate, I would go, and the library doesn't have anything, and I'd go to the reference library. There's nothing in our library on this topic. And they'd say, did you look at the topic names? And I'd say, what? There were these 4 big volumes in the US libraries, the Library of Congress headings. They were huge red folio volumes in leather in my library. And what you had to do is you had the topic that you wanted. You'd go open the book. You'd look up the topic you wanted. And then they would show you all of the names the librarians had called it and all the interrelated terms. OK, so the first thing is I have to write 25 different terms about the thing. OK, now I'll go. I find the drawer. I get to the drawer. I pull it out. Still not at the information. I thumb through until I find the appropriate cards. Aha! Still not at the information. I write down the shelf number. I look at a couple others. I write down the shelf number. OK, wander around the library, right? Let's see. Aha, here are the 800s or the PRs or whatever system you're using. Still not at the information. I find the shelf that I want. Still not at the information. I hunt through. There's the book. Aha! Still not at the information. Right? I look through the index, the table of contents. I find the page that I want. I flip there. No, that's not it at all. All right, I got to go start over. I mean, even for a small paper, searching took hours. And think about how much time you spent learning this technology in your classes, right? Teachers teaching you how to hunt and search for this, teaching you how to use indices and bibliographies and all this stuff. And it's stuff, by the way, that we now feel, that's important discipline. Students must learn this to be disciplined thinkers. And remember that as you're saying that, this is the same argument people made against the printed book, which, ironically, is exactly the thing you're searching for. I mean, the role of teachers has always been to point us in the right direction, to tell us where to go, and to help us discover that path. And that's something I think that doesn't change. But interestingly, teaching did change dramatically in this period, and it changed because of the technologies that we had. I mean, in this age, in the second age, the age of books, because finding was so hard, so complicated, we focused on delivering information. It's very different than the kind of dialectical, relational stuff that you had before that. So my task as a teacher was to tell you here are all the facts, because that saved you problems. That helped you with your informational challenge, right? Here's the information that you need. Now, I want you to memorize that and repeat it back to me. Why would I do that? I'm trying to help you solve the problem of finding. The more stuff I can cram into your head that you then carry around in your head with you forever, the easier it is for you to find stuff, right? If you know who that person was, when that person lived, where that person lived, the movements that person was associated with, the significant vocabulary terms that that person had, if you knew all that stuff, it gave you many more avenues to finding more information about that person. And the other thing we focused on cataloging information. In fact, that became the mark of education. Can you narrow, catalog, figure out exactly where things belong? Because we had to do that. That was the most important skill because it allowed us then to replicate the system. When you made new knowledge, you had to know where it fit. Fit was very important in this. And our learning became hierarchical and objective. Do you realize this is the first time we were learning from objects? And by the way, I know we were learning from objects and not people because when I would give a lecture and I'd be, saying brilliant things about Chaucer, I'd invariably have that one student who would raise his hand and say, "It's not what the book says. That's what I just said." And it's the first time we have standardized learning. Now, that standardization is something that's great in one sense and terrible in another. The benefit of standardization, the benefit of all those books coming out that are all the same is I'm no longer in a locus, I'm now in a nexus. Stuff can come to me. It can come to me from all over the place. If I think about my grocery analogy, now I'm in a supermarket. I have stuff from all over the world, not just my little local place, but stuff from all over the world, provided it comes through the official channels, right? And in texts, those official channels are the official channels of publication. Ironically, by the way, taken over in part by the university to control, the spread of this information out to the dangerous, unwashed masses. So now I've got this model where I am in one place and the information comes to me. Information not just from a few places, information now from a lot of places. And if I think about what that does to teaching and learning, there are a lot more people who can participate. A few more people who can create, but a lot more people who can participate. I'm starting to sort of connect to other people in a new way, right? But those participants, these giant masses of participants, the great thing about the printed book is, for the first time, it begins universal education. Everybody learns. But not everybody still gets to share their story. Not everybody gets to share their ideas. There's still things being lost because I only have those narrow official channels of publication. So let's think about the third age, the age of data. And step back for just a moment. It turns out that our friend Gutenberg invents the first machine to really capture the imagination of the world. Right? That idea of this machine with interchangeable parts. I can take the letters and rearrange them, but they're always the same. Everything fits where it's supposed to fit. That metaphor, that idea of the universe becomes the central metaphor, the thing that we begin to understand the whole universe about. This is Newtonian physics, right? Every careful mechanism in its careful place, everything clicking together and working. But the problem in teaching and learning, the problem in education is, if I combine this mechanized model with the model that I have of increasingly sort of narrowing and cataloging and finding smaller and smaller and smaller details, if I combine those two principles, pretty quickly I get not a carefully working machine, I get gridlock. I get the inability of the machine, in fact, to move because I have to narrow. I never get to sort of see the big picture. This is one of the complaints about modern education, right, is there's so much little minute detail that people don't understand the big pictures, the ethical dilemmas, the important human aspects of stuff. That idea of the human being lost to the machine, it's something that started plaguing us early on. Is the machine serving us or are we serving the machine? And in education, as we built these mechanized spaces to process students through, as we started building these rooms and trying to, ironically, make our people the same sort of standardized versions as our machines, well, things kind of fell apart. The thing I love about this picture, by the way, and I didn't even notice it for a very long time, is that fellow right there. He forgot his coat and tie. And you can tell, he's sort of hunched over. He's very embarrassed. Oh, it was picture day, and I forgot my coat and tie. The tragedy of this, of course, is that education is now about punishing uniqueness. Right? I mean, the model of our classrooms very often is, look, you have to be standardized. And if you're not standardized, if you don't fit in the mold, we don't really know what to do with you. I mean, we throw out the people at the bottom, we throw out the people at the top, who knows what to do with them, and we just try to pretend that everybody in the middle is exactly the same. And that emphasis on standardization, on making everybody identical, I mean, that's a dangerous thing, right? That's something that our friends Pink Floyd said, this is not a good idea, right? I don't know if you remember The Wall back in the mid-'80s, but the Wall, the sort of model of it was that education was this great meat grinder, grinding us all into the sort of hamburger, dehumanizing people, putting them on the assembly line so that you took away all of their individuality. I mean, the benefit of the technology was it allowed us to find stuff for the first time, you know, broadly connected to us. We got this information delivered to us, and that was great. Giant libraries of access. Now, for the first time in human history, I had lots of information around me. But that came at a price. And I guess the question I want to think about today is finding still our problem? Do we really need to be sacrificing, you know, making the sacrifices of that second age in a world where finding is changed? Think about this. Let's look at a search. Let's look for educational technology, for example. And let's see what happens here. Look at those numbers. 53.1 million hits in 0.23 seconds. About 53.1 million hits for educational technology. Think about that for just a second. Think about that instead for 5 seconds. Look, in fact, at each one of those pages for 5 seconds. Do that for 16 hours a day. I'm going to give you 8 hours to sleep. 16 hours a day. Do that 365 days a year. And you will finish processing the results of this one search in only 75 years, 9 months, 11 days, and 4 hours. And by the way, that's just the results of web, not images, videos, maps, news, shopping, Gmail, or more. I mean, how do you live in that world? And the problem of that world is, of course, well, it's not the locus, it's not the nexus anymore. This is the matrix, right? It's information from all over the place. And, you know, if I look at my grocery store metaphor, look, 29.9 million grocery stores online to choose from. I could get stuff from anywhere. Is there a danger here? Anyone? Would you give your credit card to any of these people? Yeah, I mean, there is no authority. That's the problem. I don't know. I mean, is Peapod online grocery shopping and delivery service, is that a trustworthy place? If I give them my credit card, will they use it to buy lots and lots of internet porn for me? Or, you know, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what to trust. I don't know where the information comes from anymore. I don't have any authority. I don't have hierarchy. Everything is fallen to pieces now. The old systems of control, the presses, you know, the distribution channels, those are collapsed. Anybody could be a grocery. You could be a grocery right now. You may be doing that. You may be selling things. Who knows? Now I don't know where stuff comes from. I can't even trace its origins. I apologize, by the way, for the oversimplification of this map. I mean, the cool thing is there are lots of people participating, but there's lots of people creating now. Right? And that's great. We're losing a lot fewer stories, but there are some stories I don't know if I should trust. I don't know if they're real. I don't know what to do with them. If when I said the Matrix, you thought this, that's probably about right, because that's the problem with this world too, is I don't know what's real or not real. And this is the problem that our students live in. Right? The challenge of the age of data is not finding anymore. Finding's easy. I can find in 0.23 seconds. The problem now is assessment. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what to pay attention to. I don't know what makes sense. And by the way, It's a problem that gets worse and worse and worse and worse. 10 years from now, in 2020, the American Library Association predicts that if information continues on its current trend line, information on the internet will be doubling every 15 minutes. So, you go to teach your standard 1-hour class. Remember, this is geometric. By the time you get out of class, there's 16 times more information than when you went into class. The worst thing is if you teach a graduate seminar of 3 hours, because when you get out, you get to process 4,096 times more information than when you went into class. How do you live in that world? How do you make sense of books in that world? And how do you teach in that world? I mean, here are the questions that I have. If information now is just oversaturating, if finding is oversaturating, do I really help my students by giving them more information? Here's more information. And if I pretend that I'm the guy at the center of the unit, I am the nexus, that old model, does that make me seem like a really credible person? But the last question is the most important one. Isn't this a world where we need the wisdom of teachers more and more? People who understand how information fits together and who understand that it's not just about the facts, but it's about the human connection with those facts. It's about being ethical. It's about, following standards. Now, something interesting is starting to happen. And at my university, it's kind of we've done a weird thing. Faced with the glut of information, we decided to give our students these. Every student gets one of these. They get an iPhone or an iPod Touch. We buy the device for them and give it to them. And here's why. We said, as teachers, we don't need to be the informational centers anymore. Because if we are, what we're doing in class is showing them the product of our research. Here's all the stuff I've discovered. But the thing that they really need to see is not the product of our research, it's the process of our research. They need to see how we're deciding what to believe and what not to believe. I mean, this is the problem of the world, a world where there's 4,096 times more stuff by the time my graduate seminar is over. So what I want to do then is not make myself the producer of information. I want to make every student in my class the producer of information. I want to stop doing what I'm doing right now, ironically. I want to stop lecturing. And I want to start processing, assessing. So if I'm talking about Chaucer, I don't want to say, let me tell you all the facts about Chaucer. I want to say, go find the facts about Chaucer. You have 0.23 seconds. Right? And then you bring it together, and let's start processing it. Is that a trustworthy source? How would you decide that's a trustworthy source? How does that source and that source, which seem contradictory, do those fit together? Is there a way to explain the patterns that we're starting to see? If I do that in class, I'm starting to give my students the tools that they need for the next informational world, for the informational world of data. And that world is a world where kind of fixed and static and standardized stuff doesn't make sense anymore because the world is changing all around them. In fact, many of our students feel that our classrooms, I heard this great quote from a student. He said, going to class is like getting on an airplane. You have to shut off all your electronic devices and you're cut off from the world until you land again. If this is the world our students are living in, we have to rethink not just teaching and learning, we have to rethink books. We have to rethink how people get to information and what information looks like. Now the interesting thing is, in this world, in a world where what we're doing is focusing not on the product of research, but the process of research. A process, by the way, that's important because it turns out 2/3 of my students are going to have jobs that don't exist yet. 2/3 of my current students at some point are going to have a job that doesn't exist. So I have to teach them those processes. And in doing that, I'm going to need to change my teaching. I'm going to need to do some key things. I'm going to need to focus on relationship with my students so that they see how I process stuff. I'm going to need to focus on being a guide or mentor for my students. I'm going to have to focus on context, that information changes depending on where you stand, and the information that you need in a particular location may be different than the information you need in a different location. In fact, that's one of the ways we're going to combat the 4,096 times problem. I'm going to have an intelligent agent, like a little device like this, that's going to tell me, okay, I know you're standing in Israel now. I'm going to give you information about Israel. And when you're standing in Texas, I'll give you information about Texas. I'll begin to narrow things down to help you, maybe. Right? And I need to have them practice their research. I need to have them practice those processes until they get it right, which means I change my own assessment methods too. And I need to be subjective and individualized again for the first time. And if this list looks familiar to you, it's because it's the same list. I mean, the funny thing that I think is going to happen is, years and years from now, people are going to look back at the 570-year period of printing and say, that was a weird blip in human history. The way we changed teaching and learning, the way we understood ourselves, that was a weird little. And that means I don't have to be confined to these little spaces anymore, right? These artificial spaces. I can go anywhere in the world now. The reason I have to come into a classroom, into this controlled space is, well, that's the only place I can, show you stuff on lovely screens like this. And it's close to the books. I got to be close to the books. But if the books could travel with me, if the high-tech projectors and classrooms could travel with me, then I can go anywhere. So if I'm going to learn about the forest, I can go to the forest. I can say, look at the interrelationship between these plants. Look at how they're growing. Look at the way this one only grows in the shade of those rocks. Look at the way the animals are interacting. I can see context and patterns. And this is so critical. And I know it feels weird because we're about to say some things are going to get obsolesced. We're going to get rid of some things. Like categorization. Do you know the problem with the library? You've maybe experienced this. A book can only go in one place on one shelf. If someone did you ever have that experience where someone had misshelved a book? We have books at my library that no one has any idea where they are. They're in the library somewhere on some shelf until someone finally, says, well, this book's misplaced, They're just lost. So let me ask you a question. How many of you get email? Oh, good. It was a silly question. You're very technologically advanced people. How many of you getting email make folders? I make little folders, and I put my email in the little folders. How many of you putting email in little folders still rely on search to find the email that you're looking for? I don't know why not. Why are you putting email in folders? If you rely on search to find it anyway, what do the folders do? I'll tell you why you make folders. Because you're trying to prove that you're not barbarians. Right? This is what we learned to do, right? In the last information age, the proof that I was a learned person was I could organize. Let me show you my organization. The problem now is, when I was getting 10 emails a day, that made perfect sense. But now that I'm getting 100 emails an hour, I'm counting spam as well, my friends. I don't know what to do with that. And what my organization does is it just makes me feel guilty. Oh, I should really take a whole weekend and just sort through. I've got 7,000 email messages in my inbox that I really just need to process. The funny thing is, many of my students, they don't, folders. Why would you make folders? You just do a search. And a search is a dynamic folder, right? And a document could be in any search, right? It could be in 20 searches at the same time, so it's great. What we need to be making is stuff now that actually helps our students face the problems that they're facing. We don't need to be creating the factory. In fact, even factories aren't creating factories anymore, right? It's not the factory model. We need to make the laboratory or laboratory. You can say it either way. Laboratory sounds a little more, right? This is Thomas Edison's lab. Edison invents, really, the modern research laboratory. And the reason he invents it is he's trying to find a filament for the light bulb. He ends up testing 10,000 substances before he finds the right thing that will work in the light bulb. And what he recognizes is the lab has to have everything in it, anything possible. It even has a pipe organ. You never know when you might need to play the organ for a while, or when, I mean, you need to have everything available in people's hands. And if we're going to have everything available, if this is going to be, the laboratory, then I think that changes how we understand books. Now, recently, Princeton did a study with the Kindle. They gave out 100 Kindles to students who did not like them at all, which was really important. Princeton discovered something critically important, that just making something digital is not the same, just making something digitized, rather, is not the same as making something digital. Right? So just throwing the book on a little device so that I can carry it around with me, that's not really answering the problem of this current age. What I really need is a change in books. I need books that do a few things. First of all, those books have got to be interactive. Right? I mean, the problem students had is, how do I take notes? How do I, dog-ear a page? It's very complicated. It's very hard to do. So we need some kind of technology that's going to do that. And by the way, I think iBooks is really interesting. That's what's showing up here on the iPad. And I would tell you, I know I'm an Apple distinguished educator and, junk like that. But let me just say, Apple doesn't give us anything. They just don't do that, tragically. It breaks my heart. I was really hoping, please give me stuff. No. But Apple's device, their devices, are the first ones that I think have the real potential to live in this new world. The problem with the Kindle, with its 256 shades of gray screen, could you envision, say, an anatomy textbook on that? I have 256 shades of gray to portray the human body in all of its complexity. I really need color. I really need the ability to play videos. I really need the ability to have audio involved. I need all this stuff. I need the laboratory, right? And I need information that's customized. What I want really is a playlist. I have my students buy books that I know from the beginning we're only going to use 3 chapters of. And now I'm paying for those books to be shipped, to be actually built and then shipped across the country. It's not very friendly to the environment. And what do my students do with them afterwards? Well, these 3 chapters, I'm just going to get rid of that book. It would be much better if I could just get those 3 chapters. Just, by the way, if you're an author, it makes you a little nervous. And I also want a book that I can mix. I want a book that I can remix. Man, I love the text from that book, but the graphics from this book. That's the thing that really makes sense to me. And by the way, your book is going to look very different from my book. And if that makes you nervous, well, welcome back to the Middle Ages, where there was no standardization. Every book is different because everybody's handwriting is different, so you get different stuff on the pages, stuff like that. I want a book that's socially connected, right? I want a book that connects me to all my peers. I write notes in the margins right now of my books. This is a brilliant idea. Ooh, I love the way you said that. Here, you're clearly being an idiot, right? What if that space were actually a space where I could carry on not just conversations, sort of imaginary conversations with myself or with the writer, but real conversations? And because it's a digital book, why not have not just one margin, but lots of margins? A margin for myself, a margin where I can talk to my classmates, a margin where I could talk to experts in the field, a margin maybe where I could talk to the publisher and writer of the book. I mean, let's reconnect this. Let's think about what it means, again, to be human, to be embodied, to be subjective, all those kinds of things. And I want a book that's augmented. Again, a book that knows where I'm standing, that knows the information I've been sort of looking at and the stuff I'm interested in. I want a book that, when we're sitting in a class, if you're really interested in politics and you're really interested in art history and you love economics, that each of you gets a book that does that thing, but that also helps us all work together for that thing. I mean, ultimately, I want a place where we're all consumers, but we're also all producers, because that's really what the world needs for its current problems. How do we solve a problem like climate change? You know, if we go at it in the kind of old-fashioned way, one thing, one focus, it doesn't work. I mean, think about climate change. Is that a scientific problem? Yes. Is it an economic problem? Yes. Is it, I don't know, a historical problem? Yes. Is it a cultural problem? Yes. Is it even an artistic problem? In the sense that art helps us understand things. If I really want to solve problems like this, I have to not have a monolithic community. I have to have a diverse community where people know how to talk to one another, even though they think about different things. This is the kind of thing we have to do, and the kinds of technologies we have to be creating, because they don't yet exist. In fact, this is the stuff you have to do at these universities here to lead the way, to discover what's next, because the world is depending on it. Thanks very much.